start. Yeah, so today we're talking about fetch. What is fetch in terms of programming languages or web development? Any ideas? A method, yeah. Is it part of JavaScript? Everyone's looking at me like, is this a trick question? Never heard of it. So the later tasks in CodeFlix, you'll start using it, definitely. If you were doing web development quite a long time ago, you might have heard of your HTTP request methods, yeah, or your XML HTTP request method. So fetch is a modern replacement for that. It's not part of JavaScript technically. It's a browser API, so it's built into the browser. But of course, it's meant to interact with JavaScript programs, and we can call it directly from inside of JavaScript files. But yeah, technically it's housed in the browser. Sometimes that line's quite thin, right, between what belongs to the browser environment and what belongs to the core language of JavaScript. So what is it used for? Well, it's used for making HTTP requests. Does anyone know what those HTTP requests are? Any sort of names? If I just Googled that quickly, what sort of things? Yeah, nice. So, in other words, I was hoping we'd just get a list. Yeah, nice, like that. So, in other words, your HTTP requests are those sort of things, yeah? So, your GET request, POST requests, PUT requests, delete requests, and there are other ones, yeah? But they're the most common ones. So it's for transferring data or information across a network, yeah, via the HTTP transfer protocol. Yeah, HTTP requests. So a GET request is what it sounds like. It's a request for information. We make a request from, it's a nice little picture here, right? We make a request from the client, from the front end, perhaps, to a server sitting somewhere else. Could be running locally on your machine, could be running in a totally different country, could be a Google server, could be whatever, yeah? So the HTTP request is what enables us to go and fetch information from that. When you type anything up here in the address bar and hit enter, that is making a HTTP GET request to a server somewhere. You're requesting a server for information. Yeah, you're trying to get some information from it. We can also make POST requests, so we can send information somewhere else. We can send information across the network using a POST request. And then a PUT request is similar. And of course, a delete request will again send information across a server with what we want to delete. So they're named after their intention, if you like. Yeah. So we'll probably just look at two today. We'll look at a GET request and a POST request, the two most common ones, arguably. And we will have a look at them in the context of React, and we'll also just run a snippet in DevTools as well. So how do we practice with fetch? One of the best ways, I think, is to use, use a open API. So in other words, I mean an API that requires no, sorry, let me just find the right file. Where are we? How to do this one, right? So an API that requires no authentication. So there are a lot of third-party APIs out there that belong to someone else. Yeah, they belong to Spotify, Amazon, all these sorts of things, right? So a lot of them are locked down. You need to register for an account. Sometimes it's free, often it's free, but you still need to register and sign up. Whereas GitHub itself has their own API. And as you've been working with GitHub quite a lot, I thought it would be good to use that one. So you're already aware of what sort of data they hold. And it's a totally open API. Anyone can make requests to it without registering and get a response back. So here, as we're using React in our development, I've just literally typed in our address bar api.github.com/repos/facebook/react. So So in other words, that's inspecting the React repo that's hosted on Facebook's URL, not 5 yard ago, repos, Facebook. What have I missed off there? I think I'll just run this and it worked. Let me just see. Let's go to that one. It's the same, right? Okay, I don't know what happened there, whether I just missed something off the end, but yeah, if we type that in the address bar, we get back a lot of information. Yeah, the raw information would look something like that. What sort of data does that look like to you? Can you see it? I can zoom in a bit more. Yeah, so to me that looks like a JSON object. Yeah, we've got our curly braces objects. We've got our keys as strings using double quotes, and then any other strings as well also have those double quotes. So we can see that we've successfully made what type of request to the GitHub API? Is it a post request? Is it a what? A GET request, yeah. So as I said, whenever we type something in the browser up there, which is all I've done, that makes a GET request to a server somewhere. So that has made under the hood, the browser has made a HTTP GET request for us, and that's the data that it has returned back. So that's fine if we're using a browser, but how do we actually mimic the same thing in our JavaScript code? Well, that's where the fetch API comes in. So if I now just go to a DevTools snippet, yeah, so we can just run a bit of JavaScript code. That one will do. I can use the same endpoint. Yeah, I can use the same URL. And inside of the function, I can make a fetch call. So the general format that you've used in your applications is you write the word fetch, you make a fetch to a certain endpoint, a certain URL, certain path, whatever you want to call it. And then we have some syntax that we may not be familiar with yet. So this dot then, what's that doing? 1 second, Richard.
When it's got the endpoint, that's when the next part of the function will happen?
Yeah, essentially. So after you've retrieved some data from the endpoint, then do something else. Yeah, it's the next part of the code that runs. But this syntax is specific to a certain, could I call it a data type? Yeah, a certain data type in JavaScript. It's specific to promises, which we haven't covered yet because we haven't done our series on asynchronous code, but promises are one way to implement asynchronous code in JavaScript. So in other words, if we just initialize this fetch and then it didn't wait for a response, then we'd try and run the next bit of code and we wouldn't have any result from the server. Yeah? So we need to wait until our promise, until our data comes back, until our promise is resolved. So you can think of a promise for now as just like a little IOU. So when that fetch call gets initiated, then it's like they've written out a little bit of paper saying, I owe you some data from GitHub. Yeah? When I actually give you that data, then you can run the rest of the code. Yeah, so that's all that then syntax means. The result, we could call it whatever we want, but result is technically the accepted name for the conventional name for the response that comes back, the body that gets sent back. So the result is the result from our server, from our GitHub server in this case. So all this function does is log the result to the console, and then return it, right? So I don't really need to do both of those things at the moment, but I'll leave it there for now, and then we'll change them up in a second. So what sort of data do we expect to get returned? When we made our API call here, we got all of this back. Will we get all of that back again? Yes? No? Not sure? Not
Yes, but
sure?
no.
Huh?
Like, we display on the page, like you will get it, but no.
So you think we're going to get something back, but it won't necessarily be in the form that we've just seen it? Is that what you're saying? Okay, yeah, cool. Let's have a look. So what we get back is a response body sort of thing, yeah, a response object with all of that stuff inside. So it's not just the data that we're after, right? It comes with some extra messages, if you like, or extra properties. It's letting us know that we've done. Does anyone know what CORS stands for? CORS, C-O-R-S. Cross origin. Have you just Googled it, Richard? What does it stand for?
Cross-origin resource sharing.
Yeah. So in other words, the resources come from somewhere else. It's not come from your own network or your own computer. It's come from a different network, yeah, or a different port even. Cool. So if just one more interesting thing then, Richard said it might return a promise. Let's see whether that will just return a promise or it won't even let us do it like that, probably.
We have natural database and analysis.
Yeah, both, right? Yeah, okay. Same thing, right? Nothing returned, just the, oh no, oh that is a return, yeah. Yeah, okay. So you see that there's this body, readable stream in there. So that's what we're interested in. We're interested in the response body. But at the moment, it's not easily readable. So how do we just get hold of that data rather than all the status codes and stuff like that, which might be useful if we're trying to handle errors. I think you've already used this in your CodeFlix. So rather than just returning the result as it is, you've chained on another method to the result. Yeah, you've chained on .json. Yeah. So that will therefore read that readable stream and pass it as a JSON object. Pass as in P-A-R-S-E, not pass, P-A-S-S. So now we can see that we've got an object back, which is more, you see the difference? So the top one is just our whole response, and our bottom one this time is a lot more similar to, where was it? To this, right? Let's have a look, see if we can compare. Yeah, see the ID, same ID, all that sort of stuff, yeah? So there are some other methods for handling the result that comes back. But JSON's by far the most common one that you'll see used. And generally when working with fetch, we if we can, we send things as JSON data and we receive things as JSON, or we pass it as JSON when we get it at the other end. But there are a few other ones, right? If you wanted to just have it as text, if it was a very simple thing that you're exchanging, you could instead pass it as text, and therefore it would wrap that object in. I'm looking for the very opening. It's a long object, obviously. It would wrap it in a string. Yeah, can you see that it's just passed that as text? It's passed it as a string. Other ones that might be useful, got a blob, which will just group it all together. Yeah, give you a size of how much you're returning, what sort of type of data it is. So that might be useful when working with other media types as opposed to just objects and strings. Yeah, and if you want to know some more, then that's a list of a few other methods, right? But by far the most common are JSON and text. So I would just stick to those two for now. MDM again has got really useful documentation on the Fetch API, so I suggest you read that if you're interested in more. Yeah, so essentially that's how we would write a GET request. And I think it's a good idea to have a look at writing that in an app here. Does it look any different when we write it inside of an app? So I've just created a tiny little React app here, and all that currently does is when you click a button, it fetches some data from the back end, or when you click a different button, it fetches it from the third-party API. Yeah? So how would you implement that in your app? Well, very similar to what we've just done. So this is just setting everything up, yeah? So set the text up, set some basic JSON data up, and then when we get down to the render, you can just see that we've got a couple of buttons, a couple of paragraphs. We're sticking in the values from the state for both the text and for the JSON, yeah? Nothing special there, nothing special there. And our fetches are also not very special. So if you notice the syntax, we're using async await here. Don't worry too much about that for now. Again, just a way to make the call asynchronous so that it waits before trying to set the state. Yeah. So what we're doing? Well, we're just fetching from an endpoint this time, an endpoint for our backend. So if I have this bit here, I'm fetching from /backend/data. Where do I need to write a route handler? Those that have got up to task 18 and onwards. That's your hint. At the top of this file. Yeah. So this is my app.js. So this is my front end file essentially, right? This is rendering my front end, rendering my buttons, rendering my UI. So I want to, if it was just on the front end, the data that I wanted to get, I wouldn't need to make a fetch request. Yeah, I only need to make a fetch if my data is stored somewhere else, on a different server, on the back end, on someone else's computer, something like that. That's the only reason I'd need to make a fetch request. So it doesn't really make sense to just write the route handler on a front end file. So where should I write that route handler instead? No?
The backend's app.js.
Yeah. So this is exactly the same as you're fetching your show data, yeah? And where are you fetching your show data from? You're fetching it from your shows.js file that is stored on your backend. So we're doing exactly the same principle here. Store some data on the backend. So let's go to my backend files. And if I hadn't already written a route handler in my server.js, then I would have to write one. Yeah, so here's my route handler. What does the fetch do? Its default HTTP request is GET requests, yeah. So therefore, what have we got on the back end? We've got a route handler for GET requests. Fetch says, I'm making a GET request to backend data. So on the backend server, we say, if you get a GET request to backend data, do all of this stuff. Yeah, send across a string that says this is data from the server. So when we click that button, what data gets sent back to the front end? Yeah, this is data from the server. That string gets sent back to app.js. And then what do we do with it on this line? What does that line do? Ignore the await for now. Just imagine that didn't have an await in there.
Set our text to the result from the GET request.
Yeah. So we've initialized some text in our state to begin with, saying data not found, because we haven't made our fetch request yet. After we do make our fetch request on line 12, then the result that comes back, we pass it as text just to make sure that it's definitely a string, it's definitely text. And then we set that to our state, our state variable, or our state property called text. And then further down, we render that on the page. Yeah, this .state.text. How many times? It's not a good question. All right. So this .setState forces a re-render, right, of the page. So when I click this button, the data not found should change to this is data from the server. Yeah, and it does. So in that few instances there that in a few milliseconds or whatever it was that I clicked on that button, then a fetch request was made from the front end to the back end. The back end sent the data back to the front end stored it in state, forced a re-render, updated the page. Yeah, that's all the steps that happen there. From a third-party API, it's very, very similar. So this time, rather than fetching from a relative link, yeah, /backend/data, we're fetching from a global link, if you like, right? The whole internet. We're saying this is your path that is on the internet. So make a call to that path. This is another free API, by the way, just JSON placeholder. And then pass your response as JSON, set it in the state, and render it on the page. So there's really no difference, right, between those two. The only difference comes when you have to authenticate things. Yeah, so then you'll have to deal with, well, we'll talk about authentication later, but you'd have to add an options object to your fetch, which we'll show how to do in a second with your post requests. So again, when I click on that button, it will now go to a third-party API and just gets back some random text or Latin or something, right, from the free API. That's it, really. Any questions on that process before we move on? If you haven't come across it yet, you will do it in your, is it task 21, guys? Can you remember what the fetch task is? Those that are around it, Nilofa, NAS, yeah? Yeah, around that number. So we're all clear on how to write fetch, yeah? Just write the name, have the endpoint, pass the data in the form that you want it, usually as JSON, and then set it in the state probably and display it in your app. That's the general format. Where do we tend to write fetch requests in a React app?
Package JSON. Oh, no.
Not
sorry,
package.json, no.
Yeah, that's for the proxy.
In a stateful component, yeah, cool. In a stateful component.
Component did not.
In the component did mount. Yeah, nice. So you can see, in fact, I'm not even doing that there, right? Because I'm using event handlers, because I'm using a button, and an on-click event, it only runs when I click a button. But if we wanted to just display it as soon as the page loads, then we would stick it in a component did mount so that it didn't stop the rendering of the page. It didn't block the rendering of the page. The page rendered first, and then it went to get the data and re-rendered the page, to show the data. Cool. Okay, if there's no questions, then I will just show you a way to write a post request. Shut that one so I don't get mixed up. So this is easily illustrated, I guess, with a form. Yeah? Ignore the layout, it's just because I've zoomed in. So if we wanted to enter some data in the form, then we usually want to store that data. We want to send it somewhere and store it. Yeah? We can't store it on the front end because if the user refreshes, it's gone. Yeah? So, yeah, alright, there are ways to do it, I guess, in the browser, but we typically send it to the back end and then onto a database. Yeah, so we are certain that our data is persisting by storing it in a database, and then we can retrieve it from the database later on. So how do we send data to the back end, or how do we send data to a database? We'll just do the back end side for now. Could we use fetch to also send data to the back end rather than just retrieve data? Yeah, definitely, right?
From the two nodding heads of Richard at the start, I assume yes.
From me and Richard nodding, everyone else assumes yes. Yeah. So fetch doesn't just limit itself to one type of HTTP request, it can do multiple types. The default is a GET request, so you don't have to specify this is a GET request. If you want to do a POST request, you have to tell it, I want to do a POST request. And we'll look at how to do that now. So essentially, the only difference, can anyone spot the difference? Well, there's a couple of differences to be honest, but the main difference, can anyone spot it? The method? Is that what you said? No, it's not what you said. Sorry, I thought it's what you said.
You put an object as the second argument.
Yeah, exactly. So, can we see that? We've still made a fetch call. First argument of our fetch method is the endpoint, as it was before. The second argument, yeah, we've got a comma, is an object. Where's the object end? No, keep going, right? So that is our second argument, an object that contains all of those key value pairs. Yeah, can you see? So on line 35, what does it say? Method post. Yeah, so we're specifically telling fetch now that we want to do a post request. We want to send data somewhere. And then what data do we want to send? Well, you can either send data in a header, or more typically, you will send it in the body. So you can see here that one of our other options keys is called body. And we're stringifying some data. We are stringifying essentially the inputted values for user, age, email, and gender. Yeah, we've stored all of that in one object, stringified it, which just means wrap the object in a string to easily send it over the network. And that's the main difference, really. Yeah, so to make a post request, have that options object as the second argument, have a method post, and put the data you want to send in the body. Then, of course, you need to write an event handler, sorry, not an event handler, a route handler again on the back end. Which one did I put it in? Get user data, store user, what did I call it? Can anyone remember? Oh, no, it's in form. So I called it rest store user. So rest store user. So this one. Yeah. And what's the difference with this route handler to the one that we had previously? Previously we had app dot. Now it's app dot post. Yeah. So that's a method built into Express that handles, or that creates a route handler for post requests. Yeah, app.post. When someone makes a post request to that endpoint, do this function. So that's actually going to send it to the database as well. But essentially, before that happens, then we're going to just console log our data. So if the post request has worked, in the console, we should see the data that we've sent from the front end to the back end. And then we're connected to the database and store it in there. But we'll deal with that another time. There's not many people are onto the database stuff yet. So we will revisit that next week. Yeah? We'll look at some database operations next week. So, let's see whether any of this is working. Who wants to be stored in our database today? Porrick's looking at me. Unlucky.
You were looking at me.
I was looking in that general direction and you turned round, so I caught your eye. So there we go. How do I do that accent? I'm not quite sure. Age. Everyone's eternally 21 when they go in the database, just to be polite. Email. Got to have the O in there, right? poc@gmail.com. And then gender, male, yeah. So if I click submit now, when I've got my console open, then hopefully we're going to get a console message with this data inside, yeah? Because that's what we've set up. We've said, when I submit my form, do a fetch post method to the backend and log it in the console. In fact, probably won't come in that console, it'll probably come in my running application console. Let's check. Oh no, it will come there. Okay, good. So, yeah, so there was a server error because probably the database isn't running. I think that's probably why it is, but we can see that we've logged all of our data to the console, and there's no console log as far as I am aware in here anywhere, right? Oh, sorry, not in there, in the front end, in the form. Oh yeah, in fact there was one there. Okay, let's try again. You've gone, where have you gone for? Oh, there you go, you're back. Yeah, okay, so we're getting a server, a local restore user. That could be because of my connect function. Let's have a look. So if I comment that out for now, see what error we're getting in the terminal. Could not proxy request, so maybe my backend's not running. Let's have a look. If I want to make sure all of my servers are stopped, what command can I use on Mac and Linux? pkill, yeah, pkill node. well remembered. And then I want to check my package.json, check my scripts, and we've got a start all script here. So I think probably before I just ran start, so I only had my front end running. So let's do npm run start all, yeah? So now same form loads, but hopefully now the back end is listening. Give me more space. That's fine, right. One more time for it. Let's see if we can get you over to the back end.
I think it's because his real name is Chewbacca.
But it's Asian, that's why.
It's because what?
His real name is Chewbacca. What are you
Oh.
That's why it's not working.
As appropriate.
Chewy.
Chewy's about 120 years old. Oh, you're doing good profile.
Yeah?
Yeah.
I think Chewy's still male, right? It's hard to tell under all that fur. But
It will work now.
it will work now, says the name. I hope you're right. It'd be a nice place to end if it worked. Okay, so I didn't get any errors when I clicked submit. That's cool. So now in my running application, we see that we have logged on the back end user Chewbacca.
You see?
Yeah. And then if you want to come over to the microphone and do your best Chewy impression, that will finish off the lecture night.
Oh, I don't have a yawn.
Yeah, so look, that's essentially what's happening in those steps. Yeah, we've sent data from the front end to the back end via a form. Yeah, quite commonly done, right? So when you submit any form online, something like this will be happening, and then they will go on to, well, they validate the form first, right, to check that you aren't sending any malicious information across. But Chewy's a nice guy, so he doesn't do that sort of stuff. And then you might go on to store that form in a database and respond to it eventually, right? So yeah, a similar process happens many times. So you've now got at least a high level overview of the steps involved to do such a thing. And again, I can share that snippet with you if you think it'd be useful. Yeah? Any questions? He's giving me funny looks again. He's warming up. He just wants to do a big yawn and a big sound.
I'm just laughing about that.
I mean,
No? All good?
Can you explain .cache to me, please?
Dot cache on what are you calling?
So you pass in, so basically, well, after fetch data, you pass in a den, you do this, then do this. But for cache, is it like to cache any errors? Is that the main purpose? Yeah, is that main purpose?
Oh, cache, did you say? I thought so cache is in... Oh, okay.
Cache.
Right. So you're talking about a try catch block?
Yeah, so just,
Okay, yeah.
just brief
Yeah,
understanding.
so how does that work? Promise. If
Just try and swipe down.
yeah, I know what you're saying. Yep.
Yeah.
So where are we? Let's go back to form.js for example. So that's might be better on that other example that I closed, I think. Yeah, I'm not handling errors here in these examples.
Oh, right, okay.
So obviously you would want to do that in production data. Yeah, the front end example would be better, but essentially you're saying you can either have a dot then, right, or and you can have a dot catch, right?
Yeah, so yeah.
Okay, and then in the dot catch you might pass in the error object and then do something like handle any errors. Yeah, or even just send the error back to the user.
Yeah.
How can we break it? See if we can get this to work. Yeah, but so what happens if the promise resolves? In other words, if the promise works, essentially, then the stuff inside of the .then block will run.
Right. Okay.
If it doesn't resolve and an error gets thrown, then the stuff inside the catch block will run. It's like an if-else, but for promises.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
Okay.
And catch is also general, the try catch block, but you can chain it on in that way as well, with promises. So yeah, that's essentially the syntax.
Okay. I'm just curious because I thought, because I'm thinking is catch is mainly used for errors, like passing.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, cool. Okay.
Yeah, catch is the code that runs when something doesn't go
Yeah,
right.
something goes wrong. Yeah.
When something goes wrong, yeah.
Okay, cool. Right, cheers.
I was just gonna see whether we could get an error. I'm thinking how I can I give a crappy thing in there, or yeah, I don't know whether
No, it's fine. It's
this is gonna work, but we can try. Yeah, okay. Let's see what we can get. Where's it gone? There it is. Chewy's gone now. No. It's not something you often do, is it? Like, get working code to break. So I'm trying to think how I can make it break.
Go there, just check one out.
Create an error object.
Yeah, just see what happens. Return error.
So what in a dot then you want to return an error?
So,
Okay. So you're saying do. Can I just do it straight away like that?
yeah.
Throw error. Okay.
Maybe if you messed up the method and changed it to something that doesn't exist.
That, yeah, that's what I tried to do with the content type. But maybe do that instead, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Doesn't matter what that returns, right? It's 200 or something. See what happens now. If not, we're have to abandon that, and I'll find a broken example to help you. That one. We've got to use your name again for it, and then it won't work. What we got here? Oh no, but we still haven't logged the actual error, have we?
Go back.
Oh, but what's in here? One error. That's just that, right? Yeah, nothing to. Go back. What do you mean? Go back?
Go back to React.
Go back to React.
Console log does some other stuff before the error to show that this is our console log. So using console log, blah blah blah, then the error.
So you have.
Where do you want a console log?
Just edit our console log to add some extra text before the error, so we know
Okay.
that this is our
True.
console.
Yeah.
There's an error, for example.
Yeah.
The error is
Yeah.
error.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. That's it.
Go again. No, see, it's not. I'm not getting into my catch block for some reason.
Must be the then function. Must be the callback function in then.
we'll leave that for now, right?
Yeah.
But I will find you a nice example using try and catch or chaining on stuff to our fetch method. Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. All right. But other than that, I think it's probably quite